Before I say anything else, I have to confess a shortcoming of mine. And I was going on and on about how wonderful it is that Lochner's Der Hauptgottesdienst will appear in English. But what I neglected to say is that we have in our midst the translator of Lochner's Hauptgottesdienst, Matthew Carver, who has done so many wonderful translations of wonderful materials. And he said he thought maybe I was trying to keep him humble, and it went out of my mind. But anyway, and yes, and so I just want to acknowledge that and publicly to thank Matthew for having taken this in hand, because I have for a number of years felt that this is a book that needs to be in circulation again. And I think once it comes out and you read it, you'll see its value. So having said that, I suppose I would ask Father James or Father Douglas if you want to add some comments or things, and so forth, and people can ask questions. So
I think going back to a point that was made during the break, Dr. Lochner wrote this book to help try to recover our liturgical identity over 100 years ago. And in some ways, this conference and other conference like St. Michael's and other conferences that are, the offspring of that. But there's still a long way to go too. But at least now we don't have to work hard to get the Amtkleidung in. So, but I don't know. I guess it's a good reminder of the task that we're doing, but we're not the first to do it either. So,
well, one of the things that strikes me, both in Walther and Lochner and probably others, though their names don't come to mind, is how worried they were that once the German language was no longer a barrier, that the Lutheran Church would be corrupted by the predominantly reformed religious atmosphere of America. They feared that. And I think that as I've looked at all of this and reflected on it and studied it in the past few years, I think it's clearer and clearer to me that the transition from German to English was clearly necessary. We could not continue as a German church. That would have been preposterous. But I think that in that transition, a great deal was lost. And for my money, the present, these congregations nominally in our synod that resemble nothing so much as a Calvary Chapel congregation are just sort of the reductio ad absurdum of this infusion of enthusiasm, Schwärmertums. And Lochner, in there, he says, his concern is to preserve this precious heritage that we have.
In Leah's agenda, he writes the same. He says that he studied 200 church agendas of the Reformation before he put his agenda together. And then you read the Wolfenbüttel agenda that is in the Chemnitz volumes, and there's a significant eye towards preserving what they've received, and in Augustana 24. Huh?
Dr. Lee, in light of modern words having such baggage, like take the word church for example. When people hear the word church, they hear closeted pedophilia and infanticide, all that stuff that burdens language today. What kind of, and especially that Vilmar was looking at it from the top down, from a university standpoint, what sort of encouragement can we take from, studying what he said and then just teaching it? I mean, is it just the Benedict option where we hunker down and just keep going at it, or what can he say about those sorts of things?
Yeah, I kind of think so. He saw society as crazed. The revolutions of the late 1840s and what he saw, was all they saw as one kind of seamless piece with the French Revolution, and that human culture had divorced itself from Christ and the church, and in one sense, we don't have the cultural connection, the cultural cohesion that the church did in Germany, right? We don't have any of that, and that's both maybe good and bad. There's pros and cons that come from both of that. I don't know. I personally think kind of the Benedict option kind of model is pretty good, and he definitely had his own political opinions, and he had political theories, and there's we can, I guess, maybe even use the word political theology, perhaps. I know other people have with respect to Wilmar. But I don't think he's going to be giving us a word of hope in terms of the turnaround of society necessarily either. So I don't think, but I think in looking inward, looking to the church and looking towards kind of recovering what we have and catechizing our own, which again is kind of what the model, which is what Dreyer and the Benedict option people say too. So rather than trying to turn the government, we need to remember what it is to be Christian. So I think that could
be fighting for the words instead of.
But fighting for the words, but fighting to teach our own, right? So.
This brought to mind a little story connected with Kleefeld. Kleefeld, in fact, ordained Wilhelm Seeler, who was pastor at St. Paul's, Fort Wayne, for a number of years. And Seeler had been an officer in the Prussian army. Before he became a pastor, was ordained by Kleefeld, sent to this country. And there's a biography of Seeler called Life in Two Worlds by young Dr. Louis Spitz. And in there, he tells about Seeler writing to a friend back in Germany about conditions here in America. And Seeler writes to his German friend, he says, "Well, of course, this is admittedly the land of humbug, which resembles nothing so much as a large house of fools with only the roof missing." So that was Dr. Seeler's estimate. For some reason, that sticks in my mind.
My question's about the three estates. I especially appreciated Dr. Spitell's angle, including that in the conversation, which the household, the third estate that maybe doesn't get talked about as much. And it occurs to me that when we talk about a restoration of piety, that if we're not doing the sort of things which nurtured the piety of our Lutheran homes and churches in the post-Reformation period, we shouldn't really expect to see much if we're only pushing in the church direction. So I appreciated that. How much might a confusion regarding the three estates or ignorance regarding that doctrine, which I would maintain is the frame for rightly understanding the two kingdoms and vocation, how much of that might be the culprit in our inability to get and maintain our tradition or rediscover restore and maintain our tradition of Lutheran piety broadly understood?
On the household side, I said it's a monumental task, because whereas generations past at least had some corporate memory of how grandma and grandpa did it, our present generation does not. So we're back to rediscovery, first of all. We have to find it, and then it has to be taught. And you're talking about teaching things to households. So it's not just, affecting some program in the parish. It's a very long-term pastoral work. Now, there are good laymen out there who are also fighting that fight. You take Anna Mussman. She's a member of my parish. She came from Emmanuel, Alexandria. She has a blog that I always get the order wrong with mother, daughter, sister, wife, or something like that. She writes for the Federalist. She writes on these things. You'll find some others, but not many, not a whole lot of voices. But we're at the very early stages of trying to. It's like we've just done the archaeological dig and we found this treasure, and now we have to figure out how to reintroduce it into our households.
To go back to the question, I'm trying to make heads and tails out of it. What do you mean? Could you speak more about how do you think that the loss of this understanding of the doctrine has precipitated the loss then of piety?
Honestly, as a Lutheran, I don't like framing things in terms of the Benedict option, and I guess that was part of it, because when you speak of society, you're not speaking of any of the three estates. You're speaking of the realm in which they correlate, and so withdrawal from society, however that's conceived of, and I know that there's good things that Mr. Dreher says, and I'm not wanting to make a conversation about the Benedict option per se, but it seems that a loss of a sense of rightful authority and where teaching or indeed governance of some sort, the father's fatherhood in all three estates is maybe not well understood, and so it's almost a hot potato of well, whose job is this to restore? Sorry for a partially formed question. Maybe I still didn't clarify what I was wondering about, but
I guess I've never thought of it from that perspective. I think of other cultural causes that have led, I think, to the disintegration of our understanding of doctrine, piety, and custom. So I haven't thought of it from the way your approach, which I'm intrigued by it. I don't think it would be one or the other, right? Because obviously we can't look at the loss of these of our identity solely from one or the other, right? We have to see it also in terms of the broader cultural movements that have affected it. But yeah,
I'm curious, sort of with that, with Father Spittel's. I've very much enjoyed that, and I've sort of been trying to do that in some way. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. Apart from I go from house, I do a lot of visitation, and we do devotions as a family. I lead them in the houses. Apart from that, do you have any ideas on how to help not do these things so that it becomes a part of the custom, or how to implement? Do you have any? I know you said it's a long-term thing and you won't see its fruition, but what are do you have any ideas, good ways to begin?
My inner German would love to have a program in place to do this, but I'm afraid it's not that simple. Laying it out in your parish, talking about it, just bringing up the idea, you will find some younger families might take an interest in it and may say, well, what can we do? Then you can guide them to resources, or you can even offer to show them. Part of this for parish pastors, if you're married and you have family, to live it yourselves, be examples. Short of that, Yeah, we could do seminars, we could do workshops. I mean, the food and faith course I did talked a lot about, and the way that course was structured was 7 Sunday evenings, and my wife and we had a class of about a dozen. So every evening we set a table and we ate and taught together. And it went backwards because we started in January and we started in Epiphany Tide and ended up in Lent. So we taught them about feasting and then fasting. But it's hard to do it the other way around. Otherwise, you're starting in Lent and ending in Easter, and I don't have time for that. But you can do some things like that to kind of do a living model, a show and tell. But household stuff is stuff that's done in a household. So just encouraging families to eat together, say simple devotions together, portals of prayer, or what's the one for kids from CPH, Little Talks with God. I mean, these are not deep theological things. Just getting families to do that, take 5 minutes, you're already light years ahead.
And I know for me, I come with very complicated forms, and I've learned to simplify it so that it actually is usable by them.
For Father Lee, was there a connection from Vilmar to the liturgy? I don't think I heard that at all.
In my presentation, no. I've not looked at any of Vilmar's liturgical writing. He has his Pastoral Theologie, and he talks in there about confession, but I have not looked at his writings about the Mass or anything like that. So I'm a bit ignorant regarding Vilmar on that subject.
Another thing, would some of those books by Lochner also be going into translation at some point soon? That might be a question for that gentleman over there at that camera, but especially that Feasts of the, and so whatever that little book was called.
You're talking about the loss of these traditions and so forth. I mean, I guess maybe this is a little bit obvious, but maybe you could comment on the extent to which is this, our loss of a sense of vocation sort of contributes to the fact that you don't understand your vocation as a grandfather or father, and what you're supposed to do, or a son or a daughter, and supposed to be learning and carrying on those traditions and so forth. And to what extent to what extent would you say that can be attributed to a loss of an understanding of that kind of vocational calling?
I think it's all intertwined. It's all related. Again, when I say we have a distracted society, it's not just that we're distracted by the busyness of life, but it seems that we're distracted from everything. Anything more than the last 15 minutes is old and discarded. The people are always, it's an insatiable need for the new, and we're infected by it. Even our faithful are infected by that. We're well marinated in the culture that we live in. So talking and teaching about proper understanding of vocation is certainly something we need to do anyway, and it will help in this regard. And another thing, within families, we, as a pastor, I tend to look at these things from a parochial standpoint, and that sort of thing. But within families, another simple thing to do is reclaim the stories. Before your elderly uncle dies, who remembers grandma and grandpa and has all the stories, get him to tell you the stories. Sit him down and talk. And just sitting down and talking with people instead of looking at your phone. This is not to be indicted or but because once they've gone to glory, you're going to wait a long time probably to get those stories, and then they're not going to help your next generation. So I remember when I served my first parish, John Huss, in Arnold, PA. They were Slovaks, and those people were still around who remembered Dobre Nebo and Bratislava. and they would tell the stories, and it really made life a little easier for this young pastor, 25 years old, right out of the seminary. You know, I'm going to sing the liturgy, and I'm going to pray matins and vespers every day, and I did that. And some of the Americanized ones, they, you know, is Catholic, but it was the old timers went, no, that's the way they did it back in the old country. Leave them alone. And I also had to learn the Slovak setting for the Our Father, and which was in the music for the liturgy. It's in the back.
So that's the Slovak.
That's the Slovak.
Yes, that's not
Our Lord
easy.
Jesus Christ, the same night in which he was betrayed. Yeah, that's it.
That's, I often wondered what that was.
That's from the Transkei Slovak.